we're an energy company, so we look at what we sell as energy or what we produce as energy. And I think that the oil industry hasn't done itself a good job in terms of dealing with being accused as the great polluters. Coal, without a shadow of doubt, is the worst polluter in our industry. And then natural gas is 30% less emissions than diesel fuel is. If you were to replace every single coal plant in this world with gas, you'd get to net zero instantly without any requirement for renewables. Now, renewables make sense because they can be deployed, they're decentralized, they're off-grid. And I think renewables make a lot more sense for continents like Africa than they would do for the Western world or the OECD countries, simply because at the end of the day, to do big capital projects require offtake. And offtake agreements require financing. Financing requires rating, which is why in Africa we have a wonderful LNG plant. Where is it shipping gas to? Europe. We don't see LNG plants liquefying gas to ship back into Africa for the African market because the African market can't really afford it. And this also brings to the point regarding price stability. At the end of the day, the African market is going to charge for its energy in local currency. They face volatility in their currency. You're financing a big gas plant with international financing. So there's to a certain extent, I think the energy as a product will evolve as markets evolve and as continents evolve. It so happens that we're dealing with a geopolitical issue with Ukraine, but 2008, 2014, we had a big drop in oil prices anyway. And OPEC played a role in creating some stability, which was very, very important because it really affected the fortunes of companies who have to provide a service year in, year out. So I think that what we should really focus on right now is how do we ensure that we can get renewable energy sources into the continent, because what gets financed is actually what gets built. And at the end of the day, we're seeing a lot of talk regarding pushing Africa in this direction, but we don't see a lot of money, a lot of financial commitments coming side by side.
But well, let me stop you there. What's the problem that we don't see that finance? You are the forefront of this. Why don't we see that finance coming into Africa at this moment?
Because even though the institutions say they don't want to finance fossil fuels or hydrocarbons, the fact remains that there's quite a bit of infrastructural latency already invested in the continent. It's much easier to build a train 7, 8, 9 of an LNG plant that's already in existence. It's a lot easier to finance. It's a lot easier to take a power plant that's got 200 megawatts, 200 megawatts, and do a third, fourth, and fifth turbine than it is to start a project from scratch. Because at the end of the day, the projects do require quite a bit of financial packaging, and the continent has faced quite a bit of impact in terms of, post-COVID, for example. We're just coming out of that level of recession in most continents and most countries and coming out. So there isn't much capital that's positioned itself to go into Africa right now. Particularly not in the renewable section. They speak about it, but when we do the absolute research about it, we don't really see that much. But we still have people interested in doing conventional projects because those ones have already been de-risked and they are relatively bankable.
We move in this continent from the phones in the house to grandma having 2 cell phones. Wale and Minister, why can't we do that right now?
Well, I wouldn't take a view as forthright as the Honorable Minister. I would say this: we're in a global community now, whether we like it or not. Africa is 3% of global GDP. 90% of the oil and gas financing comes from international institutions, not local institutions. The local institutions simply do not have the size and the capacity to do the deals we need to do in the oil industry. Maybe to produce 50,000 barrels a day, something small, you can put a syndicate of banks together. But whether we like it or not, we need them. The IBL that was signed was $600 million. We all clap today. That's a very, very big deal by African standards. It's not a big deal by international standards. But the African Export-Import Bank has done a good job in supporting the indigenous companies and allowing us to scale up, right? Now, the issue is is we need to use our resources as a bargaining tool so that it's accepted as a veritable transition fuel based upon the logic that we need the dollars anyway. We want to produce hydrocarbons and export it to Europe and the US because African countries need the dollar inflow to be able to develop their infrastructure so that they can now industrialize. And that's what creates poverty. That's what eradicates poverty. Natural resources will not eradicate poverty if it's not transferred, if those resources are not transferred to create a larger ecosystem for people, the global community, the African community to fit in. Now, I envisage that if we do this right, we can export our gas, use the fact that we have geopolitical tensions out of Ukraine, EU diversifying out of gas from Europe, out of gas from Russia, okay? The US is stepping up its production and is beginning to ship cargoes into Europe. Now, that's the traditional African gas market. We should be ensuring that the EU engages with us to be able to deliver our gas. So, for example, this Mauritania project should be on the forefront of our politicians, okay, driving it, because it's an African project, so that it gets the space and the quota to be able to deliver, and it gets financed quickly, such that we can then, in exchange, accept renewables, okay, and insist on a financing package for renewables. Now, South Africa got a financing package of what, $4 or $5 billion at the last COP meeting, simply because it's a coal-based country. It's because of yeah. So, and as I said earlier, what gets built is what gets financed. And at the end of the day, we need to be careful that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, okay? Because we need to move from 3% of global GDP to 6 and to 10. And we've got to do that with stealth and with an overall strategic plan behind this. And the way to do that is to ensure that gas is deemed and accepted as a transitional fuel, and we get our gas projects prioritized in exchange for making commitments on decarbonization. I'll say oil is dating, gas is marriage. And oil is easy to finance because we ship the cargoes as soon as we produce them. Everybody likes it, it's simple and easy. Whether we like it or not, electric vehicles are coming, the revolution is going to happen, and oil in the next 20 years will have very, very little application. So I think the continent needs to be very smart about it in terms of ensuring we have, at the point where we have our biggest bargaining power, we do something about it. Second point I'd like to make really is that intra-African trade really is the key, and the infrastructure projects which the Honorable Minister Gabriel mentioned in terms of the pipelines are critical, but oil pipelines would reduce costs. Capital investment will go into them. It will reduce the cost of transportation in trucks. But guess what? 10 years later, those cars that are going to come, that will be built and will be cheaper because they're being subsidized, will be electric vehicles anyway. So I don't see the lifespan of a lot of these product pipelines as being more than a 20-year payback period, which makes it also a bit more expensive to finance. But it still needs to be done because we have to transit. But the reality is that we do need to ensure that we have a plan, a bankable plan as a continent, which means that we need to come together to build better infrastructure, like we're doing now with the Nigeria, we're doing the AKK pipeline where we're going all the way to the north of Nigeria, 700 kilometers.
Wale,
we're going to
when are we going to see Oando sign a multi-million-dollar renewable deal?
I'm in the process of working on one. We've done one for...
What's the date, Wale?
Lagos State, we're doing the whole
What's the date, Wale?
System. It's signed
sounding
already.
now like Andy.
It's
What's the
signed
date?
already.
It's signed already.
It's signed already.
When are we going to announce it?
We've announced already, but we're going to do some more announcements as we go. I mean, our view is that we're an energy company, and we need to create a strategy that transits us from liquid fuels to gas, and from gas to energy products over a period of time, if we're going to really sustain our dominance in the market.